Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at the life and legacy of Pope Francis. He passed away just recently, April 21st, 2025, at 88 years old.
It's certainly been dominating the news, and we've gathered some material to really unpack it all.
Yeah, we have a PBS NewsHour report focusing on his legacy. The Wikipedia page gives us the facts on his death and the funeral plans.
And there's a Reddit discussion thread, too, which, always gives you that raw, diverse reaction. Plus a biography from biography.com for the background.
Exactly. So the idea is to pull out the main themes of his papacy, what happened leading up to his death, and just the range of feelings people had about him.
Try to give you a solid understanding without getting totally bogged down in details, right?
Right. And just a quick note, this deep dive is brought to you by Ben's Book Summaries.
Okay, so where do we start? His background seems key. All the sources point this out. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Buenos Aires, Argentina, back in 1936.
Parents were Italian immigrants. And that's a huge detail right there. He was the first pope ever from the Americas.
A really historic shift. It wasn't like he just appeared either.
Right.
The sources mentioned his long career in the church beforehand.
Oh, yeah, Archbishop of Buenos Aires, president of the Bishops' Conference in Argentina. I mean, he was deeply involved for decades.
Then elected pope in March 2013, number 266. And he chooses the name Francis.
After St. Francis of Assisi. Biography.com really highlights that choice, suggesting it pointed towards, well, his focus, the poor, the environment.
And that connects directly to what the PBS report emphasizes, his commitment to the signs of the times.
Right. Natalia Imperatori Lee put it really well on PBS, didn't she? Something like
Yeah, she said he looked at the world as it is, right? The grief of the world, the hope of the world, the joys of the world, and the anxieties of the world, and thought, how can the church bring attention to this? It's about engagement.
Absolutely. And a big part of that engagement was social justice. Climate change was huge for him.
David Gibson on that same PBS report made a fascinating point. He said climate change was Francis's main social justice priority.
Because he saw it connected to a broader culture of life.
Exactly. Gibson said he redefined pro-life as life from moon to tomb, but around the planet. So connecting unborn life, poverty, and the environment, it's a much bigger picture.
That's a really interesting framing. And beyond climate, he also seemed to push for dialogue on other tough issues.
Definitely. PBS mentions talks around communion for divorced and remarried Catholics, contraception, the role of women.
Though the biography is clear, the idea of women priests or deacons, that didn't happen.
No, it didn't. But PBS does point out that lay people, and women specifically, were included in the last big church meeting, the Synod. So maybe small steps towards more involvement.
Seems like it. And then there's the whole LGBTQ plus aspect, that famous quote.
Oh, yeah, on the plane, right.
Yeah.
If someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge? That line went everywhere.
It really did. It felt like a massive shift in tone, even if the doctrine didn't technically change.
Right, David Gibson pointed that out, too, on PBS. No change in doctrine about homosexual acts. But Francis did later allow priests to formally bless same-sex couples.
Which was also a big deal.
Yeah, Gibson's take was interesting. Didn't really change any doctrines regarding gay people, but he said that we are all sinners. He put everybody on the same level. That kind of pastoral approach, focusing on shared humanity.
Looking at his specific actions, those early press conferences on the plane, PBS mentioned those. They always seem to make news. A bit unscripted, maybe.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And effective. Calling the planet our common home. That phrase stuck.
And biography.com reminds us about the Year of Mercy back in 2015.
Right, where priests could forgive abortion, and then he made that permanent.
Another significant move, according to biography.com, was changing the church's stance on the death penalty, calling it inadmissible, flat out.
Yeah, quite definitive. And Wikipedia mentions his support for same-sex civil unions, which came out in that documentary, Francisco. That was before the blessings, but part of the same direction, maybe?
Seems related, yeah. And then there are things beyond church matters, like the Cuba-U.S. meeting.
Oh, right. Biography.com highlights his role in helping broker that meeting between Raul Castro and Barack Obama. That was major diplomacy.
And just the sheer number of saints he created. Biography.com puts it at over 925 canonizations, plus beatifications. That's a lot.
It is. Shows an emphasis on recognizing holiness in many forms, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The Reddit thread really brings the criticisms into focus.
Oh, yeah. That discussion board lights up with the controversies, the traditional Latin Mass or TLM restrictions that comes up again and again.
A very sensitive point for some Catholics. Some on Reddit saw it as necessary for unity. Others felt it was, attack on tradition.
Definitely divisive. And the sexual abuse crisis handling, that's still a raw nerve on Reddit, too.
Yeah, the biography mentions the initial problems with the Chilean survivor's case. He did apologize later and took action, like defrocking Cardinal McCarrick.
But you can tell from Reddit, for many survivors and critics, it wasn't enough, or the initial missteps caused lasting damage.
And some felt his statements could be, well, ambiguous sometimes, leading to confusion.
That came up a lot on Reddit, people saying different groups could twist his words to fit their agenda because things weren't always crystal clear. Created more arguments, some felt.
Also debates about who he appointed to certain positions, his interactions with politicians like Nancy Pelosi receiving communion, even how he approached the war in Ukraine.
It really is a mixed bag in that Reddit thread. You have some users calling his leadership weak, even heretical on one end.
And others passionately praising his compassion, his outreach to the margins, saying he was exactly what the church needed.
There was one interesting comment on Reddit suggesting he doesn't really fit neatly into typical Western, like American or European political boxes. Maybe that explains some of the friction.
That would be. And Wikipedia knows he met with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance not long before he died, which also got people talking, speculating.
Right. So let's talk about his final illness. The sources are pretty consistent here. He had long-term health issues, lung problems from way back.
Sciatica, knee trouble. Then Wikipedia details that final hospitalization in February 2025 started as bronchitis.
But it got much worse. Respiratory tract infection, then double pneumonia. Very serious.
Wikipedia even mentions reports that he had some near-death experiences during those 5 weeks in the hospital.
And sadly, he passed away on Easter Monday, April 21st, at his home in the Vatican.
The official cause, according to Wikipedia, a stroke, followed by cardiac arrest that they couldn't reverse.
Cardinal Kevin Farrell made the official announcement. So now the focus shifts to the funeral and what comes next.
Right. The Requiem Mass is set for April 26th. And his body will lie in state in St. Peter's Basilica starting April 23rd, so people can pay respects.
And Wikipedia notes he asked for simpler funeral rites, like a plain wooden coffin, breaking with some of the usual papal ceremony.
He also chose not to be buried in the Vatican crypts, which is the norm.
Yeah, both Wikipedia and biography.com mention this. He requested burial at the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome instead, a very specific personal choice.
His spiritual testament, released after his death and mentioned on Wikipedia, explained this wish. He also offered his suffering for peace and fraternity.
Which leads us to the big question, the succession. The papal conclave is expected in early May.
And this is where that quote from David Gibson on PBS feels so relevant. Was Pope Francis a success?
He said the only way to know is who comes next, right? Will the next pope continue Francis's path? Keep that door open.
Or will they close it? It really frames the stakes for the conclave. The future direction of the church hangs in the balance in many ways.
And his global stature is clear from the expected funeral attendees. Biography.com lists U.S. President Trump, the First Lady, Ukraine's President Zelensky.
Though notably, Wikipedia mentions Russian President Putin will not be attending, reflecting those global tensions.
So, wrapping this up, what are the key takeaways? His focus on social justice, definitely. That engagement with contemporary issues, climate, migration.
The very mixed reactions he provoked, from deep admiration to strong criticism, as we saw on Reddit especially, and now this huge moment of transition for the Catholic Church.
His death really does mark an endpoint, and the upcoming conclave, it's pivotal.
Makes you really ponder the lasting effect of that signs of the times approach he championed. Will it stick?
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. How do you think this next papal election will reflect all those different hopes and anxieties that surfaced during Pope Francis's time? What kind of leader, what kind of vision will the cardinals choose?
Something to watch very closely.
Indeed. This deep dive was brought to you by Ben's Book Summaries.